Alright, so let's look at a full domain-driven design app. So this application is managing users. And here's how it basically works. You have a domain that is shared across all of the other projects. So this domain folder would actually be and should be its own DLL file, its own library file. And then what you're going to have is a bunch of models which are roughly the same as the entities, with the username, password, everything being the same, except entities should be able to validate themselves. And besides being able to validate themselves, we want the DTOs, the data transfer objects, that the user entities become when they're taken from the repositories, to be serializable so that they can go through the wire, through HTTP requests, or be displayed on the screen, depending on how you want to do things. And it just really helps. And what you'd rather do is you use data contract and system runtime.serialization. I believe you need to go ahead and add to your project for that. So this is basically a DTO, and it has less information than the entity, and it doesn't have a validate method. Now, the data should be validated in the business logic section, but the entity itself must be able to validate itself as well. Now, going on from there, you have custom exceptions in the domain, and you have interfaces for the generic repository and the user repository. So basically, the generic repository has a bunch of methods that only it is supposed to know about. Then basically they're going to be shared across all repositories, and they're all going to match the same signature. Finally, you're going to have a user repository, and this user repository has all the methods to get to manipulate and get models from the database from the user, but it's only a declaration. Next, we have a unit of work. We have a user repository as a property and a save method. These are the only things it has. It'll have a repository for every single entity. Has its own repository, except for many-to-many relationships, which are handled in the class, in the repository where the foreign key would reside. Or, if two things depend on each other and they're coupled together, then you need to make sure that everything's handled in a transaction, and then go out and first add each of the independent entities and their respective repositories, and then go out and make the connection between the two. So anyway, here's the infrastructure. Just like I said, you got an implementation of the generic repository, and the DB set here is just a collection, but in real life it would be the entities framework or whatever ORM or ADO framework that you're using to talk to the database, LLBL, Gen, and Hibernate. And then I have this method. I have all the methods made here for the user repository, adding a user. The max ID is only present because basically I don't have an auto increment system because I'm not using a database. I'm just using a static list. So that's the problem there. And yeah, so then, and here's the unit of work. Here's a user repository method. I just realized that it does not have public void save. Now, if I was using the entity framework, I would be calling save changes right here. And, making sure everything is, set up for transactional scope in that method. The unit of work always takes a connection string and it instantiates the repositories all with that same string. But because I'm not connected to a database and I'm using just dummy data, I don't really need it. So, but I added it there anyway so that you guys at home can see. All right. Next, I have a core, and in the core are contracts, one for every business logic item. There's a user business logic, usually for registering a user or whatever. Here I have get users who are active, and a count of how many I want, and I have the ability to add a user. Same, and here's the implementation of that. Just a lambda statement that basically says if it is active, get me every single user that's possible. Make sure they are active and take the count and return a list. Simple enough. Yeah, it is a very bad implementation, but this is how it is for simple demoing purposes. Sometimes the business logic is as simple as calling repository methods, which is the same with add user. We just happen to have an user repository add method that takes a user model object. So here it is. All right, and that's all there really is to a domain-driven design architecture. At the higher levels, you have configuration for dependency interjection, which we'll get into later, and you also have the ability to catch data using a catching pattern, system.catching, I believe, or system.web.catching, and create custom object and memory catches so that you don't always have to go to the database. So what you want to do right now is stay tuned for my next video. I promise you. I'm going to keep making videos until, I run out of things to say about software and development. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you.